All right, good evening. This is Mrryanmcmahon, and I'm going to be doing a talk or a presentation that revolves mostly around the power of word and symbol, how our language came into being, what it does, and what some of the greatest minds out there have studied about words, symbols, language, and the nature of man. So, it's going to be deep, it's going to be abstract for sure. It's going to be way more effective with visuals, but this is just an audio recording, so hopefully it'll inspire people to do some digging into some of these great minds who studied the esoteric structure of the alphabet and the nature of archetypes and how our letters and symbols and words come into being and what they encode. It's extremely dynamic. It's one of the most intense studies I've ever done, and I kind of think it may never end. So, here we go. There's going to be 5 major topics or themes that I go through in this presentation. The first one is that the mind requires symbol or language in order to function. So, what that means is that mind itself is universal, but it's universal potential. It's an energy that doesn't set anything into motion or manifest anything without an image, a tone, or a symbol. The second main theme is our words uphold our reality, and we are responsible for them. So we actually co-create reality with the power of the word. Number 3, man created abstract symbols to encode time. So we created words to encode time. And we encase feelings and then revisit them or reflect upon them in a later time. So what this means is that language evolves consciousness. And if language evolves consciousness, language came out of consciousness. So this is the way that consciousness evolves itself. Number 4, etymology is a code unlocking the power of the human psyche with the word. So what this means is that all of our words came out of our natural tones, and those tones came into being because we find ourselves here in nature. And you can actually learn how to decode the nature of our words and look deeper and deeper and deeper into the meanings. And the way we do that is through the process of studying etymology. Lawrence William Lyons discovered this code. It's called The Language Crystal. It's an amazing book. I recommend everybody at least consider reading it. He discovered this code in most Indo-European root languages and in their alphabets and their symbolic structures. Basically, that each letter has a deeper, more encoded, time-based meaning. And when words come together, those meanings come together. And then 5th, symbols function as maps of meaning and archetypes of our deep psyche and our divine nature. All right, so here we go. This first slide is titled The Internal Dialogue. Our internal dialogue is our divine gift from the Creator. It bestows the power of creation. We are aware of our sentience. We create symbols of abstraction or codes due to that sentience. We store emotion in them for later times. I'm going to first start reading the great psychiatrist Thomas Szasz out of his book called The Meaning of Mind. Although animals and infants are obviously sentient, since they lack the capacity to record and recall experience, their existence seems unlikely to transcend the present. The absence of language and hints of a past and future from their lives renders speculations about their minds moot. Mind and language. The connection between mind as reason and language is indelibly engraved in the etymology of Latin and the languages derived from it. The Latin word ratio, R-A-T-I-O, means calculation or reason, and the word oratio, which is just ratio with an O in front of it, means speech and language. If reason is manifested through language, so also is unreason. The Latin ratio means calculation or reason, And O-ratio, which is just ratio with an O in front of it, means speech and language. What we're trying to get at here is that the word ratio is how we measure form. It's not just a mathematical term, but it means reason in the sense of its etymological value. So when you think about form, like say one side of a square to another, in order for us to describe that form accurately in reality or in nature, we have to reason about it. And that's where the word ratio comes from. So all math is basically a geometric ratio or reasoning. Moving on. Mind is dependent on language, as respiration is dependent on the lung. However, mind is neither brain nor self nor language. I'll repeat that. That's important. Mind is neither brain nor self nor language, but the person's ability to have a conversation with himself, the self acting as both speaker and listener, the I and the me, speaking and listening to one another. When we talk to ourselves while asleep, we are dreaming. When we talk to ourselves while awake, in ways permitted by our society, we are thinking or praying. And when we talk to ourselves while awake in ways prohibited in our society, we are said to be crazy. So what he's getting at here is mind is not the brain, it's not the self, and it's actually not language. However, mind creates all three of those. It creates the brain, the self, and language. But what mind is this ability to self-reflect, or the ability to both speak and listen to oneself. People intuitively recognize that thinking is self-conversation, and that talking and listening to oneself is as ordinary as normal phenomena. There he is again, just speaking about the fact that sentient beings all carry on an internal dialogue. And this goes back to my main point. Our internal dialogue is our divine gift from the Creator. It bestows the power of creation. I'd also like to point out that in scientific terms, we see that now modern science has studied things, and I'm referring to sonoluminescence, which is light coming from sound. This is recorded. It's in, you can look it up. It's called Star in a Jar, but you can also see it in the mantis shrimp. The mantis shrimp punches its prey at a severely fast rate and stuns it. But when you watch this event happen in a slow time lapse, like a slow motion camera, you can see that the motion of this sound, because the shrimp uses a sound wave, it doesn't actually hit its prey. That sound wave actually creates a burst of light. It's an implosion that creates light. So we actually see light in nature being created from sound, sonoluminescence. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because in the ancient Vedic scriptures, they talk about all manifestation of matter first coming from the word of God, or the word, which is sound or a tone. So I just wanted to point that out. Thomas Sawes also goes on to say, mind as consciousness. Focusing on the relationship between language and human consciousness, George Steiner offers this penetrating insight. Psychoanalysis is, in toto, a language art, a language praxis. Human consciousness is scripted and made intelligible by semantic decipherment. There's only one human minding, that is, attending to the ever-changing aspects of our environment, including ourself, and articulating as well as deciphering the experience as in language or self-conversation. So here, just re-edifying that in order for us to be conscious, we have to be self-reflexive. If we're self-reflective, it's due to our internal dialogue. It's due to our ability to hear our own inner voice. The next slide is called imagination. I'm just going to show you that the word imagination is broken up into two roots, image and nation. So imagination means a nation of images. The word image, or imag, is where we get the root word for magi or magic. So image, or imagi, is the magic of I, the magic within. We uphold our reality with our inner images and dialogue, our symbols. The magic is to be master at this and co-create our reality with full consciousness. This is our magic. It is the purpose of our imagination. Carlos Castaneda talks heavily about the internal dialogue, and he explains that we uphold our reality, we kindle it with life, so to speak, by repeating our internal dialogue. And we tend to have a hard time breaking the patterns that we repeat. So we're definitely repeating creatures. Repetition upholds this. But the key, at least for Castaneda, is to stop your internal dialogue at least long enough to recognize what it is and what you're saying to yourself. The things that are coming out of your subconscious are dictating the way you see the world, or the way the world sees you. So, quoting a woman found online named Laurel Arica on a website called Speak. I'm going to quote her. Consider the sad ring of mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, to mourn. Consider the sad ring of mourning that greets us each day as we come awake, or awake, from our nightly immersion in our personal live stream. Hear how the weekdays sounds like weekdays, and how weekend is hardly different from weekend, which is precisely how so many of us feel after being pulverized in the daily grind, though, which we endeavor to our living at various jobs and undertakings. So the key words in that paragraph are daily grind, undertaking, weekend and weekend, weekdays and weekdays. What a somber vision of a fallen life such words conjure together when shown in translation. It's a little wonder then that our most common salutation to each other is hell. Oh, hello, meaning hell. 10 years of such mind-numbing living is termed a decade, which the British so wisely pronounce decade, meaning death. We are almost as unconscious to words and their subliminal inferences as fish are to water. Yet, according to scriptures, life and death are in the power of the tongue. This means that just as we alter what we see through our acts of observation, so what we say helps define our life experiences. For not only is it done unto you as you believe, but decree a thing thus, and it shall be established unto you. So there she's pointing out the nature of the encodement that's in our actual words. Of course, our words are built by letters, which are symbols. But depending on context and depending on the way in which words are used, they have a deep psychological impression on the way in which we see reality, the way we feel, the way we move through life. Quoting Rumi, "Speak a new language so the world will be anew." So how did language come into being? How did writing happen? How did humans create writing? I'm going to be using a book called The Language Crystal from Lawrence William Lyons. Now, I got to let you know, this is really tough stuff. This is an audio version, so to talk about these things without seeing the letters and seeing the symbols and seeing the words, I know is very difficult, but I'm doing it anyway. For those that are interested, I would say you could definitely read the book. So for William Lyons, what he points out is that our history didn't exist, didn't come into being until we had writing. Writing, which is a abstraction of our sounds, of our language. We didn't write things down and put them in symbol or images until we discovered fire. So for him, this all starts with fire. Fire is the first technology that genuinely changed human life and affected consciousness in a profound way. And what he means by this is that before fire, we didn't have the time or leisure time to relax long enough out of a fear state, trying to survive, to get creative and to create things like words or symbols or images. Creativity, it can blossom due to extreme stress, but for most animals, being in a survival mode all the time, they're not sitting around in creative states of being and manifesting things, because you're not able to self-reflect. You're always on alert. So the point is that fire, when we discovered fire and we learned to wield it, the natural element of fire, the natural spirit of fire, when we learned how to handle it, we brought it into the household or in the cave or wherever we lived, and we had light at night, which enabled us to stay up and talk to each other, to communicate with each other at ease for longer and longer periods of time. Then we started to cook our food because we knew fire was transformative. We made things with it. We made, mud bricks and houses and spears, and we used fire because we knew it was transformative. But we transformed our food, and this enabled us to preserve our food, and then that enabled us to travel or be more nomadic. We could carry food with us for days or weeks and explore things, and that moving across the planet has stimulated a huge shift in consciousness. And of course, we carry fire with us. So what he's getting at here is the root word for fire is the same etymological root that we get for fear. Because when we first encountered fire, it's an elemental spirit that is really essentially uncontrollable. It does its own thing. You can't get too close to it without getting licked or burned. And of course, it can kill you. So it's an elemental spirit that needs respect. And so we feared it greatly, as all animals do. But over time, we learned to wield it, and we spent more and more time in that fear, and that fear became feel. So how does one overcome fear in life? We have to learn how to feel. And so the root word for fire is fear, is also feel. There's a deep meaning in there for our psychic nature. So it's just good to point that out. I'll also point out that in language, the symbols that we use for letters come out of nature, natural events. Usually it has to do with light, sunlight. But in this case, the Hebrew letter lamed looks a bit like a 7 with a little flame on top. It looks a lot like a flame. And essentially, that's exactly how the symbol came to be. We drew it as a reverence for fire. And so there you have it right there, that even our symbols are encoded with natural elements of fire or fear or feeling. So reading from the Language Crystal from William Lawrence Lyons. Anger is the word we use for our internalized and therefore delayed response to danger. Notice that anger is just, or that danger is just anger with a D in front of it. Other animals deal immediately with danger. They have no anger separate from danger, since such anger would only waste their energy. So what he's saying here is that animals live instinctively feeling of danger or anger, or abstract it into anger, which is an emotion, and encode it and hold it with them and carry it over time. That's what we humans do. Because we have a word for it, we can hold on to anger. We can store any named emotion and pass it on in print. Our loves, hates, joys, and fears were packaged up and handed down so we could see the riddle of our history. We had only present time emotions earlier when we were phase 1 animals. Anger and danger came together, but with the use of fire, time was divided. We built on the past to reach the future. So another thing that happened with fire was that as this technology came into our lives, we started to perceive a difference in linear time. We started to come into the present from time to time, and when we snapped out of the present, we realized there was a past. Our memory came creeping up, and then we realized, well, if there's a past, there's something known as the future. And fire enabled this to happen. Fire enabled us to consciously go into the present and create abstract art forms known as letters, symbols, or images, which now I'm reading on this page as words. It's pretty incredible. When a stick acquired a name, its form, sticking out from trees, and its use, sticking into things, were made part of it, as a complex sense of tense took possession of the sounds we made. Visions, past and future, were reflective of each other as we encoded our techno mistakes in history. Evil, E-V-I-L, was a devil, which is evil with a D on it. And devil, spelled backwards, was lived. So it's important to note that the idea of dyslexia is a huge misnomer. Dyslexia is taught that it's a bad thing, but it's actually not. It's the way in which we have managed our visual reality as human beings since we can remember. Everything we see in the retina of our eye is not only upside down, it's reversed. So the idea of anagrams or altering letters or reversing letters is an absolute essential part of the way language symbols came into being. The crystal reflects universal knowledge where good and evil are terms of survival, and since what is for one species may spell danger for the next, humans have a mystery in their words, where fire is at the center of all of our unconscious fears. But we had no need to invert our prehistoric view when swinging in the trees. Before fire, logic and feeling were one. Before we had the unconscious aspect of mind, danger and anger were dealt with by logic feeling. Written words were needed later, only after the flame had turned us into supernatural creatures. So, just reedifying that since we've wielded fire, we've become more conscious and thus supernatural, so to speak. But essentially, we're natural. We're just more self-conscious. So here we'll go on a bit more with William Lyons. Is the light outside, known as Ra, R-A, the sun god in Egypt, equal to the light within, El, E-L, as Elohim? This is our quote-unquote struggle with God. So he deciphers the Hebrew meaning of the word Israel as struggle with God. That's what he's talking about here. So he's using Ra and El as one is the light we see outside of ourselves and one is the light within. And the struggle with God is, how do we balance them? The fire of the sun gives us the light needed for biological functions. The fires we create give us hope that we may lift up and travel north eternally. Fire is the turning point of substance, the pivot of understanding. So substance, something you stand, something below what you stand, is in essence the same as understanding, something that stands under you. The fall of Adam was a grave sin. For our metaphor, gravity, gravity, binds us to earth. And the chosen son of Abraham was Isaac, whose name means laughter. So the metaphor continues, as a laugh brings levity to lift us up. So Isaac, or laughter, is the opposite of Adam, or gravity, or grave, the grave sinner. When we decode the word fall, F-A-L-L, backwards, in the language of the angels, we see laugh, L-A-F-F, and laugh has a silent G that signifies gravity, because the letter G is actually encoded to mean the ground, or gravity. The following is a list of pivotal words in our cosmic, biological, spiritual evolution. I'm just going to go through a few of these. Time, T-I-M-E, spelled backwards is emit, because we actually hold time, because we hold form. So as we move motion through motion, we actually hold and emit time. Live, spelled backwards, is evil. Kind of already gone over that. So when you're living correctly, you're not living in evil, but when you are sort of living a riotous life, you could be considered to be evil. DNA, spelled backwards, is and is the etymological root for andro, meaning man. Love in reflection begins EVOL. So LOVE reversed is EVOL, the etymological root for evolve or evolution. Love, the interconnectivity principle in the universe, is evolution. The word part, P-A-R-T, spelled backwards, is trap, meaning when you only see reality in part, you are trapped, because essentially the universe is one whole. Okay, so reading from Isha Schwaller de Lubbock's The Hermetic, beautiful Hermetic teacher, in the book called The Opening of the Way. A seed, the knowledge of Genesis. And here the knowledge of Genesis means to generate, where we get the word gene or gender, to generate. A seed. For when a man has recognized and proved upon himself that in the beginning of anything there's always the Word, that all things live by it, that its life is light, and that the gestation of this light is in darkness, then he knows that his true aim is to awaken and bear the light on the darkness of his body until its resurrection is complete. This is an incredibly encoded use of language. The seed is essentially how we see. Light not only enables us to see in the external world, but see in the internal world. Once we realize that everything is based on the gestation in the darkness of our bodies, meaning the body is the temple, then when we recognize that within our inner light is how we create the Word is how we actually manifest or co-create reality. That's what she's saying. It's the seed. In order to learn how to see, light seeds itself. And Lyons puts it in a similar way, like this. Scientists or religionists who insisted that life was created at some point in a time failed to see life in its metaphysical seed. Light reseeds, R-E-S-E-E-D-S, so like seeding a plant. Light reseeds life. But light cannot recede, R-E-C-E-D-E, means to pull back from. But light cannot recede. In truth, we each emit our own time. Seed completes C. The letter D completes C. And was, W-A-S, reflects saw, S-A-W, as we draw the universe in upon itself. So was and saw are reversed. Interesting that when you saw something, it was in the past. It's different than seeing, which is now in the present. The human spirit is simply light, seeing and seeding itself. Intention expressed in tension, information stated in formation. So information is something in form, so information. And light is the essential wave on which the spirit writes. Heavy, heavy, but brilliant. So life organized by light works through a living seed. And supernatural life begets a vision so that natural life may see. Supernatural life here is conscious life, self-conscious life. Being able to see or seed your own life is the essence of Genesis or regenesis, or you could say conscious, becoming conscious. The language crystal is the sphere that contains the universe. Well, there you go. A sphere is one whole, a holarchy, one verse, a universe. The crystal ball or sphere where the light emitted from the pineal gland forms the Word, the inner light. So there you have it. The Word is the light within us, each of us. Moving on to Rudolf Stiener, he's talking about the word conscience, which broken up is con, science, conscience, spelled con, science. So with science, or you could say with knowing, because the root word science means sentience, sia means to know. What man first listened to as the voice of God, to that he now listens as an independent power in his own mind, which he calls conscience, with knowing. Again, refers to seeing or the seed. Look at forms. Where do they come from? It's obvious that forms come out of formlessness. How does a seed know its final form as a giant oak? Our words are formed from our limitless and formless mind. Lawrence Lyons. Form comes out of formlessness. Now, we'll talk just a tiny bit about the corruption of words. So, talismanic words or mistranslations. And this happens through culture and society all the time, through media and propaganda and what we might even term politically correctness. So, the freedom of speech is essential to the consciousness of a society. And when speech is curtailed or controlled by a authority or a governmental body, you can be sure that they're trying to control your behavior. Because if they control the way that you think, they can control the way that you behave. And the way in which you think is directly dictated by your internal dialogue, your inner word. So there's tons of talismanic words out there, tons of them. I won't go into all of those, but the point here I'm just using is when the British translated the brilliant book known as the Egyptian Book of the Dead, that's the name that they called it when they were reading Egyptian and Coptic. They said this is called the Egyptian Book of the Dead, but the Egyptians didn't call it that. They called their book the Book of Coming Forth by Day. Totally different meaning. The Book of Coming Forth by Day is a proclamation or an affirmation or an inspiration into life and maybe eternal life. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, if you term it that, it's dead, decayed, lifeless, maybe even potentially meaningless. So it's just good to point out that our words have been seriously, toyed with over time. So again, this word Israel, 3 Egyptian gods, Isis, Ra, and El. Those gods are actually cosmic principles, okay? Ra is the sun god. El is the light within, or also called angels. Angels, or the messengers of the sun, messengers of God. So they're in us. And is actually what is present. And it's also the female goddess Isis, or mother. Also, the word mother is ma'at in Egyptian, which is where we get the word mother, matter, and measure. So to measure form is akin to the nurturing of the mother. So Israel means struggle with God. How so? It is psychically encoded in our words. The struggle with our divine gift of co-creation is that we have to balance our inner light with our outer light. This is the struggle. We have the power to nucleate our opposites. Balance and seesaw. Balance the seesaw. So balance past with present. Because what you saw is in the past and what you see is now. We center ourselves when we see reality as it truly is, when we are present. Present is present. That which is present is already here, meaning it's eternal. Israel is real. More on Stiener, Rudolf Stiener, a student of Goethe. Brilliant being, writer, playwright, poet, civil servant, philosopher, amongst other things. Seeing is how we perceive. Time and eternity exist together. Only form has time. Eternity does not. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. And I'd like to point out here that he's talking about seeing is how we perceive. Okay, and he's talking about seeing beyond time, seeing into eternity, which is beyond form. But I'd like to point out that perceive, the word perceive, can be broken into personal Eve, meaning the female principle of eternal life, right? Mothers give birth. That's how we keep going. But also the breakdown of the word perceive comes from the root word personal and then sept, or sieve. And this sept, so perception, is a personal septenary. And the word septenary is a group of 7. And a scepter of power, which represents the illumination of the human spine, is the reason why it's called a scepter of power is because when you're able to see, or a perfect group of 7, you're actually recognizing harmony in nature. Why is that? Because 7 is actually encoded in the human being, human body. So we actually naturally hear 7 notes in an octave, and we see 7 colors in the rainbow. And so the harmony of 7 is built into the human being. So to have perception is to actually be aware of, or be in tune with this harmonic, no pun intended. So perception is seeing a perfect group of 7, which exists throughout nature and within the self. Okay, moving on. What man first listened to as the voice of God, that he now listens to as an independent power in his own mind, which he calls conscience. That's Rudolf Stiener again. Science is by nature a paradox. The goal is to balance outer sight with inner sight. Nucleate your own opposites and solve the paradox. The only true universal existence. Going to the words of Abraham and Sarah, or Brahma and Saraswati. So Brahma in Hinduism, Brahma, is the creator god in the Trimurti of Hinduism. He has 4 faces. These represent the 4 directions. Brahma is also known as Svaryambhu, self-born. Here we go again. Self-sustaining. This is the knowledge of Genesis. Vigisa, known as the Lord of Speech. This is why I'm bringing this in here. The Lord of Speech, the power of the word. And the center of the 4 Vedas, one from each of his mouths. Veda means song. So he's the center of the song. So he's the Lord of Speech and the singer of songs. Again, we have power of language manifesting creation coming out of his mouths. So his consort was Saraswati, which is where we get in Mesopotamia and then in Latin the name Sarah, right? So Abraham is just Brahma, and Saraswati is just Sarah, or you could even say Cerealis to the Romans. And the abode where Brahma lives, known as Brahmapura Satyaloka, the word Brahmapura, I'm focusing on this word pura, means land of truth, right? Pure, that's where we get the word truth. Well, it's not the same word, but it means the same thing. Truth and pure are sort of synonymous. But the word pure comes from the word pyre, which is a symbol of the pyramid, the middle fire, right? The fire in the mid, pyramid, the pure mid, the middle purity. So we have a reference directly to fire. Abraham and Sarah, Brahma and Saraswati is a reference to the fire within. Again, the power within us, which is known as so Sarah and Abram is where we termed in our brain cerebrum. The cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the cerebrum is just Sarah and Abraham, meaning we are conscious enough to know that the human body is the temple of God. The pen is mightier than the sword. What is a sword? Well, it's that scepter of power. It's the serpent in the spine. It's the spine. It's the serpent pine, the pineal gland at the top of the spine. So what is the sword? Well, the sword is the word with an S in front of it. The serpent word, the spiraling word, the transcendental word, the crystal seam. S is known as the crystal seam in the code, in the actual language code. So the sword is the use of the word. And what's the root word for word? You get ore, meaning gold. And we get words like Lord from ore, and we get the word order, right? So ore is referring to power and orderliness, and gold and Lord. We have tons of words that I would like to go into, but in an audio talk, it's just it's impossible to see them written. But yeah, you see where I'm going with this. So anyway, reading on, Terence McKenna, the hallucinogenic promoter for the boundary dissolving expansion of consciousness, he believed basically that all of our religions and our esoteric meanings came out of the use of hallucinogenic plants and establishing cultures around them. People, groups, cults, practicing the use of, let's say, spiritual and psychic exploration. So he goes on to say, the world is synactical in nature, and synactical refers to syntax, the way in which we use language and the way in which it's formed. So the world is synactical in nature. This is what they don't tell you in the schools of philosophy and physics, meaning the universe is actually made of words. There has to be a speaker and a hearer. Words like photons, quarks, and atoms are not what the universe is about. That is just a linguistic model that floats above the bedrock of synactical concretedness. Mind travels through networks that it self-interprets as meaningful. This is what's really going on. So he's aware of the power of language, actually creating what we see as reality. And he's smart. He realizes that the Newtonian physics model of atoms and particles, it's totally false. It doesn't actually work. It doesn't make much sense at all, because it separates everything from everything else. And we can just see in nature that everything is connected, interconnected. So particle theory is pretty bunk. Wave theory is way more accurate. The universe is moving fluidly in waves, and matter is just wound up waves. Most likely optic waves or electrical waves, but that's another topic. So I want to briefly talk about this weird encodement that we have deep in our language. And one way to see this is what a surd is, S-U-R-D. So if you don't know what a surd is, it's a voiceless consonant, usually uttered by breath. So it's a letter, it's a consonant that's in words we use all the time, but we don't pronounce it. However, a hint of it is there in our breath. So for example, when I say the word light, it's L-I-G-H-T, but you don't hear a G sound in there at all. You don't hear the G, right? Or the J, G sound, because the G is actually a voiceless consonant, or a surd. It's a bit absurd. It's there, we know it's there, but it's extremely strange the way it's used. It's a bit absurd. So I'm gonna say this phrase that has the word dumb and dumber, and the word numb and number, and the B in these words. So the B in dumb and dumber is the surd, because you don't actually hear the word. You don't hear the B when you say dumber, and you don't hear the B in the word numb. So it's a surd. So here's the phrase: dumb gets dumber if truth goes unheard, and numb gets number if there is no word. There's a lot going on in there. It's saying that number is actually based on letters. So number is actually just another symbol that we use to talk about quantity instead of quality. Letters we use to talk mostly about quality, but we can also use them to talk about quantity. So dumb gets dumber if truth goes unheard. If we're unaware of the power of our language, we get dumber. And numb gets number if there's no word. Interesting. Another use of the surd is in the word soldier. So the D in soldier is the surd. You don't really hear the duh, you hear a j, like soldier. So D is a surd. It's a voiceless consonant. So the root word for soldier is sold. Interesting. We never think about soldiers as being commodities, do we? The soldier who was sold did not listen for the surd. There you go, Lawrence William Lyons. So in closing, I'd just like to say a few things about this whole talk for me is like a bit like a song. Even though I'm not singing, the use of my speech here is my song. So what is the etymological code for the word song? You have S-O-N-G. Well, S is the crystal seam, which is also a serpent. It's the transcendental line between dualities, right? Between yin and yang. So the crystal seam is transcendence. It's how we see. So that's the S. O-N is the root word for ontology, which is the study of being, right? It's also being on, being turned on, awake. And G, the G is the universal symbol for gravity. So that brings it down into form, basically, here on earth in form. So what is my song? It's the transcendent crystal seam of ontology, of being on here on earth. So thank you guys for listening. Hopefully you get something out of this. Hopefully you can share it. I recommend reading Alvin Boyd Kuhn, The Esoteric Structure of the Alphabet, and I recommend reading William Lawrence Lyons, The Language Crystal. There's a lot of other people to read too when it comes to language, but Thomas Sawes is very good at language. Terence McKenna speaks a lot about language. A lot of these people I quoted here. And I'll just close with a couple of words. Present and nowhere. So the present is timeless because it is pre-sent. When we are present, we are aware of our eternity because it's always here. It's pre-sent. It's everywhere, always. Think of the word nowhere. Sometimes we feel like we're nowhere, even when we're present. It's when you are now here. So you are not in the past. You're not in the future. When you're nowhere, you are now here in the present, which is a gift. Thank you.